So I'm back with another pundit op-ed sort of podcast-ish video about something interesting in the car world that's been on my mind. This time, I'm going to get a little bit controversial. I think the mic's too far. Let's see. Also, a little bit of a different background. I thought I'd change it up a little bit. I want to talk to you all about my thoughts about the new Beamer, the G80 M3 and G82 M4. Now, I know this is a topic that has been beaten to death. Tons of people have been talking about it. A lot of people on YouTube seem to just be buying them, which may have something to do with it. I wanted to sort of delve into where this strife is because, well, it stems from an article that I read on topgear.com. It was a sort of tongue-in-cheek article talking about how the M3, throughout the generations, from its inception, has always been a troll of a car. It's always been meant to ruffle the feathers of enthusiasts. It's always the type of thing where the last M car that came out is always the better one. But because of this, my particular gripes about the car, which have been pretty emphatic to the people who know me, they sort of get drowned out by the trend. So it becomes like a boy who cried wolf scenario. But I don't think I'm too far off with my thoughts. So to give a bit of context where I came into this whole M3 saga, I was introduced to the M3 at around the E46 range, and at the time I was about 12 or 13 years old, but additionally, I didn't have any interest in cars at the time. A former friend of mine actually would drool over this car, and he introduced me to that car and the concept of sport cars and sought-after cars in general. As a 13-year-old kid, this just wasn't on my radar. However, even though this was like my sort of nice to meet you moment for performance cars and the car that the M3 sort of exemplifies. But the interesting thing is, even though that was the first time I had seen anything that the M3 would exemplify, I got it. I understood what it was trying to do, right? It was a slightly different but sleek older sister to the 3 Series range. It had everything that makes it a 3 Series, but then it had these added benefits, right? It had the slightly flared wheel arches. It looked chisel-jawed when you looked at it from the front. It had the side, the little grills on the front fenders. It had the quad exhaust. It had almost an M badge on every corner of the car. But as a novice at the time, I would look at it, and once I started to know what other BMWs looked like, I would often mistake it for a 330 Ci. And those of you out there who appreciate M cars for what they are can understand why that's actually a good thing, because if you knew, you knew. The feeling I had first looking at it, not being a car enthusiast, was like, that's a very elegant looking car. It's beautiful on the inside and out. It was contemporary, but just really stylish. You could take it to the track and then take a lady friend to dinner, or somebody who had an appreciation for beauty, but not necessarily for cars. They could sit in the car and totally love it. Like, it's just beautifully designed. And that was the example of what BMW is. It's funny because my cousin would always describe BMW interiors as business boring. And in a way that sort of plays to its strength, right? It was almost like a suit, but it was like an extreme athlete wearing a suit. I don't know. It was a weird example, but you get what I'm saying. There was this ability for it to just be what it was in two different realms. And everybody understood that. So after learning a bit about the E46 M3, I gave my nod of understanding, and having gotten into Gran Turismo at the time, now I started to get a little bit of an understanding about cars, and I just went on with my life. The M3 never fell back into my radar. It was never something I thought I would ever own, but I understood what they were trying to do, and I respected it. Then a few years go by, I start to gain a little spark of interest in cars in general, and then the E90, E92 get announced. Specifically, the E92 got announced first. And when I first saw it, I was like, the wheelbase was longer. It had a V8. And I was like, it's just so interesting. I can't get over the fact that just one experience with one M3, just looking at it, not even driving it or sitting in it, and it already gave me a sense of what it's about. And it made me wonder if the E92 was getting that sense. Then the press release on the website came out, and I was sold. It looked beautiful in motion. It sounded beautiful. I understood it, right? I understood this is a new iteration. And again, compared to the other 3 Series coupes and sedans, it was just a little bit more exterior-wise. Of course, it cranked it up to 11 under the hood. But the slight flare in the arches, the quad exhaust, the way the front bumper always has those 3 holes. Like, I was starting to understand the direction that each M car was going. And again, whether you were an enthusiast or you were just a person who appreciated beauty, you could absolutely appreciate the car. It got to a point where I was like, that E92 is way better looking than the E46. Granted, now I'm at a point in my life where I see both as sort of serving different... It was a little bit of a Venn diagram, but they do serve different palettes, if you will. And this is where I started to form my opinion about the naysayers. I think people were just jumping on that bandwagon out of habit because people like to complain. Oddly enough, the F80 and F82 sort of slipped under the radar for me. And that's ironic because that's when I was more into cars and definitely like super into Top Gear. And yet I don't remember a definitive point that it came out. But what I did get exposed to it was when I was watching Top Gear's The Perfect Road Trip 2, where Richard and Jeremy go to Mugello and Jeremy drives the M4. It was interesting because this was a point where I started to compare the M3 and now the M4 to like Batman. Batman is a superhero that I, like many people, just adore to this day. And one of the things I've realized about Batman, whether it's the movies or the comics or whatever it be, you can't ruin Batman because there's always another iteration. You can always reinvent him. That's kind of how I felt about the M3. Each generation was a new thing. You could always, like the E36, people hated, and they just fixed it for the next one. The E46 came out and it was amazing. So that's kind of the sentiment I started to get. But the F82, I looked at it and I was like, this thing looks amazing. To tie that into the whole Batman thing is, I didn't look at it the way I looked at the E92. I looked at the E92 and compared it to the E46 and I was like, that seems off. But by the time the F82 came out, I already was looking at it like, okay, this is a different generation. It's a different car. It's still trying to fit the tenets of a BMW M3, but with its new styling. And that was perfectly fine because it didn't deviate too far. And it's funny because Jeremy was actually commenting on that in that episode of The Perfect Road Trips. He was making fun of how many angles there were just in the one corner of the car with the headlight. And I remember just completely disagreeing with him. I was like, this looks unbelievable. And just like the previous one, as a performer, it just outdoes the predecessor. So what's not to love about it? Oh yeah, the two turbochargers. I wasn't really that bothered by there being turbochargers in it because at the end of the day, it still outperformed the E92. It was 2 seconds faster in the standing kilometer. It outperformed in terms of handling because of the new drive shaft and all this stuff. It was just better. It was a better car. That's where it entered my life. That's where I got my first, actually, it's my first rear-wheel drive car, my first BMW, and my first M car. And it was an M4. I'll never forget the day I sat into it because I remember telling the BMW genius next to me who was walking me through the car, like, I don't belong in this thing. It was amazing. And I'll tell you something else. The interior on an M3, M4, F80, F82, one of the best interiors of any car that I've ever sat in. That's why I still have mine. My F82 went back, but I got an F80 competition after that. I'm in love with it. I couldn't ask for a better car. It's just amazing in so many different ways. And the turbochargers don't mean anything, especially once you've been on a track and you realize that what you really love is listening to the car from the inside. Don't care if it's semi-synthetic, but I really don't care what it sounds like on the outside. Anyway, the point being, this was a point at which I was like, I get it. I can be one of those people who can appreciate the next M car because I understand the evolution while it's still sticking to certain foundational principles. And so with that, and with a long, we come to the G80 and G82. And let me say that I'm not here to form an opinion on behalf of the entire M community or the entire car community. And I definitely believe, especially with cars, that everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I think one of the beauties of being interested in cars is that you meet people, like getting to know people who are part of different car clubs, people who are into American muscle, people who are into European, people who are into import tuners. It's like visiting people from a different country. The diversity in the world exists to create interest, to create diversity, to create interactivity in cultures and to learn. I'm getting a little bit deep here, but the point being, on a smaller scale, The thing that makes it appreciative for people to have different opinions about cars is just the love for what they love. And you don't have to love it, and I don't have to love it. But I think that's what gives me the confidence to have my own opinion about this and be comfortable when I look at the G80 or G82 and the only word that comes to mind is incorrect. And while I could sit here and list all of the things I think are wrong with the car, like the grille, the rear end I don't think looks right. I don't know what they did with this M Performance exhaust being clustered like the car has hemorrhoids. The interior being a lot more radical. Everything about the car is more radical and more edgy and more like, look at me. It's funny because so many people were like, oh, the F90 looks way too much like a normal 5 Series. Well, look what happens when the pendulum swings in the other direction. I guess to be more tactful and to be more complete, I would say that what the G80 does is take everything I've said about the previous generations and literally violate all of it. Literally all of it. The only thing I could really say comprehensively about the G80 and G82 in terms of its styling and the performance figures and whatnot, it literally does not everything that the other generations do. But again, everyone's entitled to their opinion. If you have a G80 or G82, tell us what you love about it, right? Everyone is entitled to love what they love. And what I realized is I can have a staunch opinion about it. I can be emotional about it, but it's my opinion. You love what you love. I remember I was getting my tire changed on my F80, and I came across a guy who came in to get new wheels for his upcoming G82. And we started talking, and I told him all of the reasons why I don't think that this is a good M3 or M4. He sort of agreed with some of it, and he was like, oh man, I don't know. And I was like, look, do you like the car? He's like, I love it. End of story. People can say whatever they want. You love what you love. And I know in today's society, that's especially the YouTube society, that goes against everything in YouTube because most YouTube influencers with cars usually buy cars for the attention, for the views, which is why they flip them so quickly. But for those of us who just genuinely love what they love, the thing that I love about the M3 is that most people don't know it's an M3 that I have. And I don't care to show anybody. It's something that I love. I feel connected to it. And I guess that's the silver lining, right? The fact that the new one came out and I'm just completely disinterested in it makes me look back every time I park mine and smile. Because after all, the previous generation's always the better one. But then I suppose on the plus side for BMW, what they did do to people like me is make me more interested in having an M5. So I guess their plan worked. Because I now want the more expensive one. But anyway, that's all I have to say for this time. Not to spark an argument, but to spark an interesting conversation to get people to bring out their opinions and share their opinions. At the end of the day, they're cars, and who knows what direction the car world is going. So it's all about appreciating what you have now. But I think this is one of those things, because cars are not the most important topic in the world, it's the easiest place to have differing opinions and just laugh about it and connect about it and share about it without being malicious, without being attacking each other, without being angry at each other, and just enjoying the discussion. But that's all I've got. I'll see you next time.